All right, good morning, everyone. I'd like to call to order the open meeting for Tuesday, January 10th, 2023, and ask the Commission Secretary for information on today's agenda.
Each commissioner has independently reviewed the minutes of the open meeting of Thursday, December 22nd, 2022, and the minutes of the open meeting of Thursday, December 29th, 2022, and each has informed me there's no need to discuss those minutes.
Move we approve the minutes of Thursday, December 22nd, 2022.
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
Move we approve the minutes of Thursday, December 29th, 2022.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Each commissioner has independently reviewed the agenda, and each has informed me there's no need to discuss the notices associated with agenda items 3 and 4.
Move we approve the notices of investigation associated with agenda items 3 and 4.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right, that brings us to agenda item 5, which is docket 5-LL-2022. So this is, we're considering whether to grant or deny a request for waivers of the administrative code filed by Frontier to allow Frontier to be reimbursed for the Lifeline credits it issued during 2020 and 2021. The Lifeline program here in Wisconsin provides discounts on voice telecommunications service for qualified low-income customers. Specifically, the admin code requires that all eligible telecommunications carriers offer all qualified low-income customers a Lifeline adjustment or a credit to the customer's rate. The admin code sets the amount of the credit, which can range from between $10 to $18.50 a month. Providers are reimbursed for the credits that they issue. Then the Federal Universal Service Fund reimburses the provider for up to $9.25 per month per customer. The remainder of the credit is reimbursed by the state USF. So carriers then file with us for approval of their reimbursement rates, and the actual reimbursement payment is handled by a third-party administrator, Solix, for the State Universal Service Fund. PSC 160 went through some revisions back in 2000. One of those revisions was that carriers are required to file any reimbursement requests for a given calendar year by April 1st of the following year. So what we are looking at is we are looking at a request for Frontier. Frontier had a couple of issues going on the last couple of years. They filed for some reimbursements. There were errors that were found, a couple of transpositions of digits in the spreadsheets. But after all of that, they are looking to receive reimbursement for Lifeline credits that they provided to customers in 2020 and 2021, yet neither carrier, it's two different Frontier corporate entities, neither one of them requested reimbursement in the appropriate time frame. There's no question that they paid out those credits. It was $14,100 for calendar year 2020 and $61,200 for calendar year 2021. And so I understand that it's complicated, but I didn't find any reason to grant them the waiver. In my mind, they had plenty of time to work with our staff and to iron out any issues that they had. Or, you know, our staff is always ready and available to answer questions if they were running into issues. And so for their waiver requests for the credits that were issued during 2020 and 2021, I'm at alternative 2. I would deny both of their requests for waiver. Commissioner Noack.
Yeah, I'm in the same spot as you, and I acknowledge that there were some complications and some mistakes made and so forth, but what was missing to me here, you know, and I'm willing to work with the companies, there was no, they knew they were going to be late, and there was nothing in the record that indicated that they gave any advance warning, asked about, could we get away, you know, there was, to me, they should have been a little more proactive rather than just file late and hope that there's a reimbursement. This is a large company, obviously, and I think that they, you know, have those abilities and people there that know how to do that kind of stuff. So that's what I was looking for here, is some acknowledgement earlier on that there was going to be a problem and we were going to be late, and hey, heads up, how can we do this? That wasn't here, so that was the deciding factor for me as well. I agree that the reimbursement is not we shouldn't be allowed here.
Okay. Commissioner Hebner?
Yep, I'm in the same spot as you both, alternative two, and as Commissioner Nowak said, that was determinative for me too, that we have a process. You can be late, but you gotta let us know. They didn't do that. So I'm at alt two.
Okay. So then that takes us to, so that clears out calendar year 2020 and 2021. They did, to your point, Commissioner Nowak, they did say, okay, we think we're going to have a problem going forward. So they did request that deadline for their calendar year 2020 request be extended until June 1st. I don't have a problem granting that extension right now. Clearly, you know, they need the extra time, and I'm happy to provide that additional time. So as it relates to calendar year 2022, I would allow the deadline of June 1st of 2023 for them to file their requests. Commissioner Nowak?
Yeah, that's, I agree with that for 2022, for 2021's, no, for 2022's years. Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, okay. Commissioner Hebner?
Okay, I was at alt two on this, but I can join you at alt one. I don't have a problem with that.
Okay. All right, and then the final thing is, there is a request that they be allowed to use an average reimbursement rate. And my understanding is that customers would continue to receive Lifeline discounts based on the actual rates that they're being charged, but that the reimbursement requests would use this averaged rate. This goes to the heart of the complexity that the company indicated they ran into as it relates to 2020 and 2021. They've got more than 700 different reimbursement rates because of how the carrier centers and the wire centers are set up. And so our third-party administrator has also had to create a special process. I looked through PSC 160, and I didn't find anything that would prohibit the use of this weighted average method for requesting reimbursement. And because customers are being made whole in that they're going to receive the discount that they are actually being charged, I didn't have an issue with this. My understanding is the math shakes out. And so for this, I thought it was a reasonable approach in the interest of administrative efficiency, so I was at alt 1, approving that weighted average method. Commissioner Nowak?
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, I think, given there is the complexity, we'll see how it works. I'm not sure that this is, let's see how this works with this particular carrier and how it shakes out. If there's some, we don't want under or over reimbursement, and I'm sure they'll be here if it's under.
Right.
So I'm okay with that.
Okay.
Maybe on time.
Yeah, right. Commissioner Hebner?
Yep, I'm with you both. I think the average approach makes a lot of sense for this particular entity, so we'll see how it works. I'm at alt one.
Okay, all right.
Okay, so then in docket 5LL 2022, I move that we deny the request for reimbursement for Frontier North and Communications for calendar years 2020 and 2021, grant an extension for filing in 2022, and allow for the Lifeline credits to be issued on a going forward basis on an average basis pursuant to our discussion.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, that takes us to agenda item 6, which is docket 9300-DR-105, and Commissioner Nowak is leading this discussion.
Thank you. Okay, so this is the discussion of the request from Midwest Renewable Energy Association, or MREA, for a declaratory ruling that third-party finance distributed energy resources are not public utilities as defined in 196.015A, and therefore not subject to this commission's jurisdiction under any statute or rule regulating public utilities. 18 parties were granted intervention. Much of the legal analysis mirrors the discussion that we had in a substantially similar petition filed in the Vote Solar matter and that we discussed on December 1st of last year. MREA intends to enter into contracts with an unlimited number of customers that share 11 attributes identified in its petition. And for the same reasons I articulated when we discussed the Vote Solar petition, this petition should also be denied. MREA requests a declaratory ruling allowing entities that own generating assets to sell electricity in competition with existing utilities. MREA believes these entities should be allowed to compete with existing utilities without being subject to rate setting, consumer protections, or the protections against excess generation, or the obligation to serve, the requirement to maintain adequacy in all circumstances, or maintain a transmission or distribution network. The request here is broad, even though it has since provided additional information that more particularly identifies what it refers to as a school project. This commission cannot craft a narrow ruling to again and try to save this petition from its own legal shortcomings. The commission knows so little about that school project that crafting a ruling to accommodate this project, that project, would have its own legal flaws, the least of which is that MREA doesn't hide the fact that it again intends to offer third-party financing arrangements to more than just whoever the customer or customers are for that school project, and that this is just an initial step in implementing its mission. So, based on their own admission, there is no legally defensible way for this commission to differentiate MREA's customers from the general public. And just like the Vote Solar petition, this commission should call MREA's petition what it is, a request to change the law, something we can't do. In every single instance when we have been presented with applications not involving single customer-specific disputes, we have declined to issue a declaratory ruling. This petition shouldn't be treated differently. Not only would a denial of the petition be consistent with our previous discussions and decisions, it would be in accord with the Cocker matter, which requires a case-by-case determination. Also, as articulated by multiple interveners, the broad ruling from this commission would constitute improper rulemaking. MREA's request for this commission to assume a set of conditions and then apply them to anyone if those conditions are true would constitute an order of general application. We do not have authority to recognize a new class of unregulated public utilities, and MREA has not provided any authority for our ability to do so because there is none. A broad ruling would also be challenged on the grounds that this commission is improperly adding an exception to 196.015, and it was this commission that recently acknowledged that legislation is needed when an exception to the definition of public utility is created. When we talked about the Vote Solar matter, I mentioned that this commission had advised the Wisconsin Department of Transportation when it was in discussions with the U.S. Department of Transportation in relation to funding for electric vehicle charging stations. The WISDOT letter stated, the PSC of Wisconsin position maintains that a legislative change is needed to provide a clarification of the statutory definition of a public utility, exempting EV charging stations from the utility definition. And so while that subject matter was EV chargers and not distributed energy, the underlying issue is the same. Under current law, entities that wish to sell electricity to the public are subject to this commission's jurisdiction absent a change in the law. So, and again, I believe the Cocker and its progeny apply here. And again, the one thing I think that really, again, I think that was incorrectly determined in Vote Solar was that what Cocker and its progeny tell us is that it's the equipment, that's not the determining factor, it's the enterprise in question. And MREA's focus on the equipment in its briefing and in its testimony here, and not the business, is contrary to all of that case law that interprets what a public utility is under Wisconsin law. And I thought the example provided by WA in its brief demonstrates the problem with that equipment-focused test because it leads to inconsistent and absurd results. The example they gave was that if there are two entities, each selling power to 100 customers in Wisconsin, and one does so by building, owning, and operating one power plant to serve all 100 customers, the other does so by installing, owning, and operating 100 rooftop solar arrays, one for each customer. Both own and operate equipment and produce power for the public. But in MREA's interpretation, the first example would be a public utility, the second would not. because each piece of the ladders is not serving any other customer. And to me, that is an absurd interpretation and elevates form over substance. Two last points I want to focus on that I think really deserves a lot of attention in this discussion, and that's the consumer protection issues and the economic consequences to non-participating customers in these types of arrangements. Again, inexplicably, the interveners in support of MREA's petition, including the Citizens Utility Board, downplay the consumer protection concerns and argue without support that consumer protections can be addressed later. What they don't explain is how the commission would even have jurisdiction to impose consumer protections if they want us to disclaim jurisdiction over those entities. It just doesn't make any sense to me. And next, over the last several months, we've had a lot of discussion here and heard from interveners about the impact of energy bills on low-income earners. But those advocates are absent in this proceeding, and it's hard to understand why, since non-participating customers bear a disproportionate share of the costs of the used and useful assets. As noted by the Utility Association witness, Mr. Graves, due to the utility's pricing structure where most fixed costs are recovered in that variable rate and timing disparities, DER customers avoid large bills while avoiding many system costs, and that difference is collected elsewhere, meaning from other customers who are likely to be less affluent than DER owners. And as Mr. Graves testified, the result by all accounts is regressive, with lower income customers subsidizing higher income customers who can afford the distributed energy. And so for those reasons and the reasons I stated in Vote Solar, and I will be writing about soon, I think that MREA's petition should be denied.
Okay. Thank you. All right, so I think it's pretty clear through all of our discussions and through lots of years of reading Cocker and its progeny that the legislature has invested in this commission the ability to decide whether or not to issue a declaratory ruling. That's without question. I think for me, what it turns on is that language about making specific case-by-case determinations, and that we are required to consider the particular facts and circumstances presented. And I think it's imperative that we stay within those bounds. In the Vote Solar case that we decided a few weeks ago, there was a very specific arrangement, very specific facts and circumstances, a very specific project. We don't have that here. This is the opposite. And in my mind, that is the deciding factor. It's clear that we have to have specific facts and circumstances, as we did in the Vote Solar case. We don't have that here. It was only through, and this was part of the reason why I wanted to open the declaratory ruling, was because I wanted to try to get more information. And it was through that process that, quite frankly, some of the information changed as the process went along. And I'm left at the end of the day with the record in front of me that is unclear in terms of what the specific terms and conditions of the contract are. And so in my mind, this particular case stands in stark contrast to the Vote Solar case. The Vote Solar case had very specific facts, very specific terms and conditions. This does not, and I am not and have never been ready or willing to push this commission's limits beyond what is legally appropriate. And my reading of the statute and my reading of Cocker and its progeny and my reading of the myriad declaratory ruling cases that have come before us, it makes it clear that this particular set of facts is not ripe. And so I could do one of two things. I could either outright deny it, or I could send it back and try to get to the end of this school project, if it is in fact a viable project, that they have, a customer waiting to be interconnected, but it's not here. And the declaratory ruling statute limits our ability to make broad sweeping generalizations, and I've never been willing to do that. So I'll continue to look at these as they come to us. If they come to us and I'm betting if nothing happens at the legislature that they will continue to come to us on a case-by-case basis. But if that's the case, then it has to be a very specific and narrow set of facts, which we are then empowered to use our expertise and our technical knowledge to determine whether or not that specific set of facts fits under the definition of a public utility. So I'm sort of at those two places, either deny or send it back to get more information.
You ready for me?
Ready?
All right. Thank you both. I'm coming into this discussion at an alternative 3, which is to get more information. But let me walk through my thinking on this. After spending another few weeks with, as Commissioner Nowak said, substantially similar material as the Vote Solar project as we have here today with MREA, I am convinced that we did make the right decision in the Vote Solar family project. I'll be writing a concurrence that mirrors much of my public comments in that case, that as it relates to a single entity that owns a single project, I don't think Northwind would be a public utility under those facts and circumstances. In this particular case, MREA is asking for more in 3 ways by my count. First, MREA is asking for more technologies, solar PV, inverters. Those two go together and work together, but then you've got battery energy storage, thermal energy storage, a smart thermostat, smart appliances, and demand management systems. And they're asking that if those are owned by MREA or another entity, would not make that entity a public utility. So, number one, they're asking for more technology. Second, MREA is asking for itself to be able to install more than one of these installations and not be a public utility. And third, MREA is asking for any other entity to similarly be found not to be a public utility. So I'm going to address those in reverse order. First, I believe our determination will need to focus on whether MREA is a public utility based on the equipment that it owns, operates, manages, or controls. I don't see how we will be able to determine that any other entity will never be a public utility because that entity's ownership and operation may be materially different than MREA's. So focusing on MREA, in order for MREA to become a public utility, the activity it undertakes, as described in the statute, would need to be to or for the public. And that, to me, is the service, the activity, not the advertisements, not the audience. The services will need to be to or for the public. And the parties variously argue whether the entity is a public utility, absent the purpose of any equipment, or whether it's only the equipment, unrelated to any entity. And I think the statute and the case law requires a consideration of both. The question is whether the entity is a public utility. Equipment itself can't be a public utility. The entity has to be a public utility or not. But the entity must be owning, operating, managing, or controlling plant or equipment that is to or for the public. As Cocker and others have said, we must consider what the plant and equipment is actually doing. In this case, the purpose of each DER is to partially serve only one customer. However, can you serve each customer over and over and over and not be the public? Honestly, I do not know. The prior case law we have in Wisconsin all relates to distinct pieces of equipment, one piece of equipment at one location that's serving more than one customer. We don't have case law describing how to handle multiple pieces of equipment at multiple locations serving multiple customers. To find that that arrangement is not a public utility, I believe we need to make either one of two findings. Either that the pieces of equipment, even in aggregate, do not serve the public as a public utility, or that the customers served are in a restricted class. I am not yet convinced that the contract for solar power alone is enough to create the restricted class. Cawker is about tenant and landlord and a few incidental neighbors. Sun Prairie is about tenant and landlord. I don't agree that the relationship needs to be pre-existing. The case law does not say that. I'm just not sure that the contract alone complies with that case law. The contract for solar power alone. However, it could be that certain characteristics, such as membership or certain attributes, could create a subclass of the public. I would like MREA to define what subclass they would be serving. Is it anyone willing to sign that contract? Is it just schools, just nonprofits? Is it MREA members? What distinguishing factors exist? The next avenue, the other avenue, as I mentioned before, this is not well discussed in the record at all, but it would help us differentiate whether the service at hand is indeed clothed with the public interest, even if MREA were to own numerous such DERs, and that it would be the differentiation between the provision of solar photovoltaic energy, which operates when the sun is out, versus public utility provision, which we recognize as 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. This primarily is what the Iowa Supreme Court found, or one of their key findings. And they use quotes in their findings such as, the installation is no more dedicated to public use than the thermal windows or extra layers of insulation in the building itself. The next quote, it seems clear that the provision of on-site solar energy are not an indispensable service that ordinarily cries out for public regulation. And third, they stated, although some may wish it so, behind-the-meter solar equipment is not an essential commodity required by all members of the public. It is instead an option for those who seek to lessen their utility bills or who desire to promote green energy. You can take it or leave it. Those quotes constituted some of the reason that the Iowa Supreme Court determined a similar transaction was not impressed with the public interest. Finally, very little, if any, record development related to the attributes of the other DER technologies and whether any of the characteristics of those technologies make them more or less like public utility service. In particular, as I discussed, the solar photovoltaic panels and the direct alternating current inverter would be attached to that. So record development on how that is distinct from utility provision would be helpful. The next technology they offer is battery energy storage. Well, that may have very different characteristics. Thermal energy storage is mentioned but not discussed at all. We don't know what that means. Is that simply a water heater? Or is it something else? We would need to know what the characteristics of that are. My hunch is we would not need to deal at all with smart thermostats or smart appliances that are inside of a building. However, we don't have details on that. Finally, the demand management system, demand controller, or smart panel. Again, I would think that would be not something that we would think is a public utility, but we do not have information. So those are the questions I'm left with. So I would like to see additional record evidence demonstrating what these technologies actually do. As Cawker says, what is their intent? What is their purpose? So that we can understand and determine if that service relates to the public interest differently or similarly to behind-the-meter solar. So I would reopen the record to get answers to those questions. However, I'd also be open, in addition to your suggestion, Chair, which is, just looking at a specific project or a specific set of projects, if that was their alternative,
Yeah.
so.
I mean, I would like to have a fully executed agreement specific to a project, and I think it's probably going to hinge largely on at least the three big topics that I think
Yeah.
you hit on.
Commissioner Huebner, you have a lot of great questions, but if we're going to decide things on a case-by-case basis, looking at heat pumps and smart, that's a generic docket. That's not, please don't go there. But, I just really struggle with, we need to decide these on a case-by-case basis, and it's great, we should know how these apply with other situations, but that's not what we're tasked to do. You're asked to look at that specific circumstance and that specific piece of equipment before you. So I think, I don't even know that we should, I wouldn't send this back at all. If they want to refile something, that's their prerogative. Like, it is not our job to help craft anyone's proceedings. What's before us now is not a specific case. If they have one at some point, there's nothing ripe. We can't say, I mean, geez, I'm having visions of a certain circuit court case. Just keep going until you find something. We can't just say, let's keep it open until, you catch a fish here. Come back if you've got something. There's nothing ripe here. And I think that's not what our process is used for. And I also even question, like, what is MREA's role? Is it them or their entities? Like, they're the association. Are they going to enter into some of the contracts, or are their members going to enter into because that was an issue in Vote Solar, because it was Northwind, it wasn't even who should even be bringing it? If it's somebody different, then, come at a different time, different docket, new information. But there is, I think we're stepping beyond trying to, again, save something that isn't quite there yet. They can refile.
I don't have a problem asking for the record to be supplemented. I think if we use your list, Commissioner Huebner, then we can take a look at it, and then we can bring it back and talk about it. And if at the conclusion of seeing that additional information, we agree that there's not enough there, then we can make that determination at that particular time. So I would
His
join
list
you.
of are you okay with everything he listed? Because that's not a case-specific matter then.
Well, I have three sort of additional pieces of information that you laid out, Commissioner Huebner. At least that's the way I
Yeah.
understood it. The first was related to the technology, and that is what is being proposed here, right? What's the issue? The second is property versus entity. And the third was frequency of the provision by the entity and to whom. And maybe I've overgeneralized it, but that's,
And by frequency,
what I
do you
heard.
mean like the number of installations?
yeah, I mean, I
Yeah.
think we saw that, right? We saw
Yeah.
that come through as the case kind of
Yeah.
wound its way through.
I
And I
guess-
think that's important. I do think that's an important consideration.
Well, it's kind of like the example WA gave, like, is it going to be 1 or is it going to be 10? At what point is this commission going to say, when we aggregate, this is a public utility? Because Cocker even says public can be 1. So having 10 doesn't make a difference if 1 can be a public. So I guess,
Yeah, I just think the other cases, and I described them more last week, is, there's the Schumacher case, and I think as Wolf, about the clothes with the public interest. And where there is a monopoly or a service that isn't duplicated, and I think MRA makes the argument that this is a competitive industry. And those are what other states, commissions and legislatures, but more importantly, commissions and courts have used to distinguish utility service from solar PV.
well, most of them
So-
have done it through legislation.
Many
And-
have.
Yeah.
But not all.
And citing
Yeah.
to Iowa is interesting, but that's not our law. So I will dissent because I'll write again.
Okay?
Do we
You wanna make them-
make an order, or just get more information consistent with our
So it'll be,
discussion?
in order to reopen, which we will endeavor to capture the area of your inquiry based upon the discussion today. And then the process will, we can the order to reopen, to accept more, and probably send it then to the ALJ to
Yep.
get the process and
Yep.
how that additional information is to be gathered, whether it's supplemental or how they want to handle it. The parties can figure that out with
Yep.
the ALJ.
Okay. So I move that we reopen the record to gather the information discussed today.
And I will second that. All in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed?
No.
Okay, that concludes our official business for the open part of today's meeting. We are going to go into closed session. We're going to go into closed session to discuss the litigation matter noted on our agenda, which is the petition of Oconto Electric Cooperative for declaratory ruling regarding the right to supply energy to new customers.
Move that we go into close pursuant to 1985, sub 1G.
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Welcome back, everybody. I'm going to move in docket, or in the Oconto Electric versus Public Service Commission of Wisconsin matter, that we reopen the matter to address the issues for reband.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, that concludes our official business for today. Our next open meeting is scheduled for Thursday, January 19th, 2023 at 10:30 a.m.
Will we stand adjourn until January 19th?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.